Well, listen, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Tobias. I don't think this will be the last time that you and I talk and certainly work together. There's so many great opportunities going forward, certainly within the space that I'm in as well. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to end, like I always end, with what keeps you passionate about engineering?
For me, what keeps me passionate is that I feel I can play. I feel I can really make a contribution. I'm just immensely grateful, for the journey that I've been on and all these like different like weird windy bits, to now have come to a place where like, yeah, I realize like in a way how I'm wired, and I have the immense privilege to work with other amazing people that are wired in potentially similar ways, or that are, still on their journeys of like figuring out like how am I actually like wired. But it's the sense of like, yeah, we're able to, create a world that we want our kids to live in, and we're able to create a world where we can really draw forth the potential people hold.
Tobias, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, mate.
This is exciting every episode, but yeah, this is really, really exciting because I think this could go really deep. Anyone that's reading, who you are before, if they're not connected with you or haven't listened to this episode, might see renewable energy engineer. But I think that's just the icing on top of the cake. I think there's a lot beneath that, which I'm so excited about diving into.
Amazing. Yeah, renewable energy engineering is what's marketable.
Yeah.
But in the end, I feel in most of the engineering projects I'm in, it's really about the human aspect underneath.
Yeah.
And I feel there's also like so many layers to renewable energy. There's the renewable energy for society, where you have whatever your wind turbines, your solar panels, hydrogen, but then it's the human being. Like a human being powered by hope, I feel is the most renewable energy technology that's available on our planet.
I completely agree, and I think there's more layers than that. I think there's technology, there's people, there's the impact to people, there's the impact people can make. There's, but yeah, this is interesting. I mentioned you at the start in terms of I never preset themes, but I'm going to preset 3 things I think we're going to talk about. So, and the reason you're here, you and I met last year at Tectonic through Nick Murray and the events that he runs. But I think there's 3 things that you certainly are going to be invaluable to the community. Engineering for one, which is good.
Yeah. 2,
I think your mindset for your Buddhism and how people can adapt to that, or certainly dip into it if they don't want to go fully all in. And then number 3, the startup area, which I think is maybe a bit unfair, but all of it comes into engineering empowerment. And I'm excited for people to hear about your career. So let's dive straight in.
Yeah.
You went to university. What was your mindset? Because there's a lot of university students who think, are almost ingrained, university, apply for a job. What was your step after university? Because you'd bounced around, like you said, you'd been out to America, you got your degree. What was next after that?
Yeah, I guess initially the idea was, okay, go to uni, have a job. But then, so basically I did my year in Germany, then went to Sweden for 3 months, came back for another year in Germany. Then I went to the States for a year and then finished my degree there. Basically sent all my paperwork to Germany. They gave me the German degree. The Americans got the German paperwork, gave me the American degree. And while I was there, I met this, actually, I think British guy, and he was really excited about like South America. And already when I was going to the States, I remember I was sitting in this park in my German uni and writing down a whole bunch of intentions that I had for the time while I was away. And one of the big things was to, really just experience what life can offer me. And, have an amazing American girlfriend, which ultimately turned into my first wife, the mother of my 2 kids. And yeah, but then, when I was in the States, there was this guy speaking about all these things in South America. So I was like, cool, let's go. So I then, decided to go to South America for 2 months. And at the time, I got really increasingly interested in renewable energy. So my dad had always been really interested in putting solar cells on the house and kind of living as off-grid as potentially possible. And so while I was traveling for South America, I was like, okay, cool. now I've been in the American context, hardcore capitalist. So what's the craziest opposite is basically going to not a communist China, which is totally like not as communist. I personally had a really amazing experience in China in 2012, and so yeah, I always find there's also a level of, how do certain regimes in the world speak about other regimes to potentially, keep a level of animosity, to keep people like, oh no, I don't want to go there because my country is great and will protect me and blah blah blah. But no, so I applied to this wind power company to do an internship. So I went there for 6 months, did a wind power internship in China, and then I had really gotten very excited about the whole double degree thing. I was like, man, invest 2 years, get basically 2 degrees. So I found this other conglomerate of universities in Scandinavia, Iceland, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and they offered this thing called innovative sustainable energy engineering. I was like, man, this is it, So I applied for that, and yeah, then essentially went on doing a master's. But before that, my then girlfriend and I, we were like, okay, but where do we want to live? This whole long distance thing is not really working. So we ended up moving to Germany. I got a research job at Fraunhofer, which is basically an engineering research institute, where we developed a new solar cell metallization technology. Then during that time, we became pregnant, or she became pregnant, and so our first son was on the way. I was like, okay, we really need to make the move now to go to Norway for me to be able to finish my master's. So I went to Norway, and then, the whole thing with like having a child and studying, it was a massive shock, man. This whole thing, I was like, wow, now the whole sort of Erasmus being kind of work hard, party hard modus is no longer working. And so
you don't have to be in another country to realize that.
Yeah, then it was like hardcore, man, and then so it was like, okay, now I need to kind of like start working. And so while I was studying, I did all sorts of things, from teaching assistant to being a researcher for zero emission buildings to supporting courses on design thinking to working in Burger King, just anything that sort of like made the economics work.
Yeah.
And then my first job really after uni was as a marketing manager for informatics ventures at the University of Edinburgh here in Scotland.
So I'm going to take a step back then before you get to Scotland, because you've tapped into so many. I speak to a lot of students and a lot of graduates on a weekly basis. There's so many pain points around, as I mentioned, getting a job. But I think sometimes we think about getting a job as a transactional. I've done this and I want this, so therefore it needs to be available. I think you've described it, and I think the way I would describe it to everyone who engages with engineer career in a very similar way. It's not about that transactional. It's about where are the opportunities. Can they benefit me today? What can I build and learn at the time? And it's going to help me build towards something in the future. Because if you look at you right now, you're a product of what you've done before. Yeah. But the product, when you were going through them before, you didn't think about where you are today.
It didn't make any sense, actually.
Yeah, so that's a student then, now that you can reflect on that, or a graduate, what do you think the behaviour is that you need to try and home in on to look at things as opportunities?
For me, the behaviour at that time was like, I just need to fucking survive. Because I had like 10,000 euros as a sort of like starting capital that I took to Norway. I was like, cool, this is like what we're using to like build our family. But then the euro and Norwegian kroner exchange rate basically made this money evaporate. And then I was like, pfft. And then, my wife at the time, she was like, mate, you really need to pull your shit together and actually like make sure that you're stepping up to serve this family. And so in many ways, I think she's been very instrumental in supporting me to move out of this la 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 la, it's all fun and games, to all right, what can I do to like actually support us?
Yeah.
And so we applied for a number of like different grants as well, but then it was really in the university context, knowing people and going to professors being like, hey, do we have any like research or teaching assistant positions? Then I did an architecture course, and the woman that was teaching a course really enjoyed my contributions, and she was like, oh, you're having a summer job coming up, are you interested? So also being open to serendipity in that moment.
Yeah.
And even before, when I was doing my thing in the States, the the professor there was like, oh man, we would really love to keep you and, have you as a PhD student. But at that time I had already decided, okay, I want to, travel South America. Same in Germany when I was doing the solar power thing. The researcher was like, oh, it would really be great if you could write your master's topic on this. But there were definitely moments when I think I wasn't really ready to because I felt sort of a job would also be kind of like tying me down in a way. And I knew that as a student, there were enough opportunities to basically get funding to, continue my student career, so to say. But then there's definitely been this mind shift of, cool, at some point I need to create value with what I'm actually learning. And then using the connections that already have been in my life was the piece where, right, cool. Let's just basically ask people a few questions, because most of the jobs, they're never ever advertised anyway. Because
most of the jobs are never advertised, or most of the jobs are advertised and they don't describe it right.
oh yeah, and even if a job is advertised, because I mean that's the other thing I learned in the software world later on is like category of one. If I'm asking for jobs, then I'm going for something where there's absolutely no competition. If I'm going for a job that's advertised, then I'm essentially like putting myself into this competition game. It's like I'm already setting myself up to need to prove myself, rather than when I'm reaching out to people that I like or to organizations that I think are interesting. It's like, cool, this is who I am. I'd love to contribute. Is there any opportunity?
Love it. Invaluable. That is a belter of a bit of advice. I absolutely love it. So what brought you to Scotland then?
It was the whole thing of, so I had almost finished my master's degree. We were basically 3.5 years into living in Scotland with in Norway, living with babies. And so, yeah, my wife at the time, she's American. Norway is a quite difficult country to integrate. And just, it felt really sort of like grating on the soul for her. And then with that also like grating on the soul for me, where I was like, oh man, there seems to be this constant sort of like dissatisfaction in a way. And there was also this element of always having moved every sort of like 6 months sort of prior to having a kid. And then so being 3.5 years stuck in one place, like, holy moly, this is going to be another like, whatever, 15.5 or 14.5 years to sort of make the kids grow up and then maybe, can travel again. And so at some point, then my ex-wife, she was reading a book about Edinburgh by Alexander McCall Smith. And we were speaking, where do we want to move? There was Malta and the United Kingdom, because the States wasn't an option, or potentially New Zealand or Canada, but it was definitely, okay, let's aim for somewhere in Europe. And then, yeah, serendipity, she read the book, she thought Edinburgh was fantastic. She got really deep into like, oh man, Edinburgh is exciting. And then she bought me a plane ticket to come here to Edinburgh for, I think, 6 days to just explore and see what it feels like. It's like, cool, yeah. And I feel that was definitely part of my travel personality still there. I was like, man, yeah, let's have a fresh start.
Yeah.
And also hoping that, it would just smooth out some of the relationship challenges that we were experiencing just by actually not being prepared to be parents. And like what it means and the responsibility that we would take. And yeah, then essentially it was cool. Edinburgh looks amazing. So I was looking for jobs in Edinburgh. And the weirdest thing, man, I was finding this 1-year interim role as a marketing manager for informatics ventures, where I would support startups. And in Norway, I had already supported a number of different startups and found the startup scene really exciting. I was working with some of the guys who were the organizers of Slush in Finland. And so one of the just like weirdest like micro skill sets, because the moment I actually moved to Norway, I arrived there and I met a friend of a woman that we lived with in Germany, and she was part of the design department. And so she was our sort of first local contact. And so, she took me to the design department. I was always interested in design. And so she showed me around, and then I met some of the people there. One of the professors was German. And so we clicked, and I was like, cool, I'll actually do my engineering thesis more with a design focus of like, human behavior elements. And so I ended up actually spending most of my time kind of more in the design engineering type field in Norway. And so, I used Illustrator and InDesign and all these sort of programs to make things look nice. And so when I was applying for this informatics ventures job, one of the things was like, cool, give us a piece of reference of your work. This is what we need to do. So I did this little task and they were like, cool, yeah, absolutely amazing. And so essentially a skill that was a completely sort of like to the side niche thing got me a job here. And then I immediately moved, from engineering studies into marketing, which then set me onto this track of, how am I ever going to go back into engineering? Because, all my work experience or like work as sort of like after uni was then, showing, okay, marketing, blah, blah. And it's like, I think for a long time I really struggled with then how would I ever sort of like transition back, or do I ever want to transition back?
That's interesting. But I mean, we'll get on to it, but I think there's ingrained behaviours and ingrained mindset, which there's a worry and an anxiety, but actually being an engineer or being whatever you are is kind of who you are almost. So you can tap back into it, and you've obviously demonstrated it within your career. So when you got to Edinburgh, and I think it's consistent, because I mean, when you look through what you've done, you've continued to evolve and pivot and do different things, which is really interesting. And then you ended up in 2019 deciding to start out on your own. Talk us through a wee bit about what Embodied is and why you decided to essentially start off on your own, and what you're doing now. Say now you've for 7 years, so what you've been doing.
Yeah, so Embodied is boutique engineering consulting, and the best way I can capture it at the moment is sustainable human behavior engineered. And it's really about human flourishing at its core. So, when I came to Edinburgh, I first worked in informatics ventures and did all this like software stuff, being around lots of startups. And I always feel like, man, this startup thing is really exciting.
Absolutely, it's amazing, isn't it? The energy is amazing.
The energy is like amazing. There's this buzz. There's this like, okay, working with ideas. But then also a lot of startups seem to be a bit kind of like, okay, it's a great idea. Maybe they're a bit backed by some sort of like capital. But then is there actually a human and societal need? And if that's not there, then, the startup disappears. But so then, after this 1 year role in informatics ventures, I worked for a blockchain company, got into the whole bit of like scrum mastering. And then I went to a conference in Istanbul. And during that time, sort of the relationship with my ex-wife, like we broke apart, and it was like really like a deep sort of like introspective journey of like, all right, who am I? What do I want? Where am I going? Like, why do I, experience these things in life? Like, how do I create these situations that then ultimately, cause suffering? So when I went to this conference in Istanbul by Mind Valley, I spoke to one of my colleagues before and was like, when I come back, I'm going to be a different man. And yeah, I came back shortly after this blockchain job. Like the role that I was working with within this company was made obsolete. So the CEO was like, look, thanks very much. We don't need your role anymore. And then at that point I was like, cool. I was getting a bit into these sort of like breakfast meetup type things. So I was like, cool, let me just like start a company. And so I started a company, and we're doing these breakfast meetups. I was like, where is this sort of really going? And then I got back in touch with one of my previous guys from Norway. He was doing lots of training for companies in innovation and using mindfulness to actually, really allow people to tap into themselves to then actually innovate from a place of much more like heartfeltness. And then, the whole COVID thing came about. And so one of my other friends then joined the company, and we were like, cool, let's really look at this thing of like bringing people together around sort of like shared themes and this exploration of, what is their essence and how can they actually like through their essence create value in the world. So Embodied in the beginning really started out as this self-development focused company. And then as we were continuing to go, and then I stumbled, I say I kind of like stumbled about Buddhism, but it was like actually ever since I was a teenager, when I was in train stations reading these psychology magazines, and I always felt drawn to these Eastern modalities. Then when I lived in China, I went to different monasteries And then even in Scotland, I went to the Samueling monastery in the borders with my kids. It was really funny, actually. My older son, he immediately walked to the front, sat on a cushion, cross-legged. But so then I took my kids to a skate park in Portobello one day, and I was skating myself at the time, thinking like, let's have fun, all the kiddos have fun. And yeah, so there was this, when I was walking into the skate park, I remember I saw this woman with 2 boys. I was like, man, she's a very attractive mom. And so it turned out she had put her bag onto the same bench as I, and at some point, I was drinking some water, and she was there, I think, giving one of the kids a snack or something. I was like, oh, you got some absolutely amazing energy. And she was like, oh yeah, because I chant. I was like, what is this? And then, turned out that she's practicing this form of Buddhism called Nichiren Buddhism, which is a Buddhism practicing mantra meditation. So yeah, she invited me along for one of the meetings, and I was definitely like, oh yeah, keen to explore Buddhism and also keen to see her again. So yeah, and that's really where my whole thing started, with tapping into actually a consistent Buddhist practice.
Yeah.
But then also, I've been always very skeptical of sort of organized religion. And having an engineering mindset, my thing was then, cool, I'm gonna test this practice and actually see what it does. Because I felt something changing within me. I felt like my physiology was being different. And what I had come across over the years was I got really interested in the heart, and what does the heart actually do? Like, how does the heart, support the body through its magnetic field and being a vortex generator, rather than, what is often talked about, the heart being the pump to pump the blood around, blah, blah, blah. So I then came across this Austrian company called Autonom Health, who are deep in heart rate variability measurements and having a consumer product which is like absolutely like medical grade. So I then started testing my chanting with this heart rate variability measurements and seeing like, wow, there's like some crazy patterns that are coming out that, breath work or any of these other things wouldn't do. And yeah, then from there, as COVID came to an end and all our modalities of these different formats that we had, much more kind of like online, started falling apart. And I was like, we need to make money. So I came to a point where actually I was doing Deliveroo for, I think, 2.5, 3 years to sort of like bolster my income from being on this entrepreneurial journey. And really, I think having this entrepreneurial journey very much as a journey of, self-development, self-discovery. And so I had then come across, actually through Nick Murray as well, he had posted about the RBS Accelerator. And at the time I had decided to go to the Edinburgh Uni Law School to actually be in an environment which inspired me, and then I realized, cool, let's go all in on this heart rate variability biofeedback thing and start building a sort of consultancy model around that. Went into this accelerator. Shortly after, met a guy who was building hydrogen compressors. He was having some funding, looking to hire engineers. I told him, look, yeah, I can totally introduce you to engineers. Since I'm an engineer myself, I have a whole bunch of people I know. But then it turned out that he was really quite interested in hiring me. So, we had a dialogue. And I had made a decision a few years ago, because I had a long period as well when I was like looking to somehow, sustain myself, sustain my family, applying to lots of different engineering roles, and realized like none of these are actually coming through. And I was like, what? I'm just so tired of like this rejection game. So I decided, I will never ever apply for a role. The role will fall into my lap. And then in that moment, boom, the role fell into my lap. Joined them as basically their first employee. Then, became head of prototyping at some point, head of product innovation, built this concept for a liquid piston hydrogen compressor, up until the point that, that company ran out of funding. And in that moment, I had met so many people in the hydrogen industry and something had really changed within me, where it's like, I will always have an abundance of money. And I will always make sure that my family and the people I love are well supported, they're safe, they're sound, that they have everything they need. So I started calling a few people that I knew, and one of the companies was like, well, we need support. So yeah, and since then I stepped into busy engineering consulting, and since last year, September, I'm doing it like full time through my own company again, and just the joy it brings and the level of contribution that I can make. And yeah, I've been always chanting for the last few years to be indispensable in my workplace. And so I feel, with this Buddhist philosophy in my life, it's really opened up this kind of full circle of, wow, yes, I provide engineering services, and there's a lot of humanity in engineering, and engineering teams need that sense of, really feeling seen, and that sense of like, wow, we work to self-express, and we work with others to come together, because I think men really benefit from actually having other men to do work with, and while you work with them, you actually have a dialogue about all the other things that are part of our emotional landscape.
Sometimes it's something not spoken about, certainly within, I guess, males, is that kind of emotional awareness in terms of mental health, etc., that ties off the back of that. So it's something, and I guess male-dominated environment, engineering should be more balanced, but that's other conversations. But it's really interesting. I guess, I could sit and listen to all day, Tobias, and that's when we met, we were talking, and just listening away, it's fascinating. I think, my own personal experience with not Buddhism, but it was like 2020 with mindfulness, and just due to due to kind of professional work and needing to take a step away take a step away when I wasn't in the workplace, but to kind of centre myself, if you want to put it that way, and it completely changed my mindset on both what I can provide, but also how you engage with people, how people benefit from your engagement. I never took the step to Buddhism, but I guess if you were to speak to a student right now, or someone in their early careers around finding that central kind of part and understanding themselves, and I know you mentioned about the chanting, but putting the chanting to the side, what would you advise someone to kind of like, or how would you sell it to someone to in other words?
It's maybe less about the selling element, but the big shift that I realized is that I'm no longer in sort of negotiation with an employer to, ask the employer, because I'm not looking for something, right? I'm not looking for money. It's like, okay, what is it that I am that I can offer? And the moment that changed for me, the moment I moved away from, I need this job because I actually need the money. So what I wanted was the money. It wasn't like the job, or it wasn't the contribution, or anything that, I could actually do within whatever, that 8-hour day. And as soon as that swapped around, it's like, okay, like what can I contribute? Like what do I want to create? Then it was like, cool. Now it's no longer a negotiation. It's just like I'm laying out the terms, and if the terms don't work, then fine. Then I'll go somewhere else.
And you've built a career of finding alternative things. You've got evidence of that, and that, and I think, like, going back to we spoke about beforehand in terms of having a vision of where you're going to be, but all the things that you do before it are just steps towards it.
Oh yeah, all the things that I've done now and I'm doing right now, there are steps towards something else.
Yeah,
and it's always, as Steve Jobs would say, the dots never make sense looking forward, but they always make sense looking back. And just at this moment, I'm in the process of signing a different contract where I'll support an organization through project engineering, and it's been really exciting to now see actually like all my skills come together, the ability to actually have good human relationships, the ability to sort of draw forth potential in people, and encourage people to treat work as, look, this is an amazing opportunity to really discover more about yourself, and it's less about the paycheck and more about what are you learning about yourself. Because basically, if you're not learning anything in a job, then it's not a good job, then you're really just there for the money. Yeah. But if there's so many other benefits, and the money is basically like a side benefit, I feel that is really when it becomes really, really exciting.
Yeah, I've got this phrase that I use, is like, when you find your passion, you find your purpose. And that sounds like just a phrase, but there's techniques that I use with students around how you find ultimately where you're meant to be, because when you're a student or you're a graduate, it's very easy to get sucked into the application processes that you apply. And what you do is you apply for companies that you know the names of, and you begin to forget why you're actually wanting and what you're actually going to contribute and where you want to be.
Yeah.
So, really homing in on who you are, what you are, why you're doing what you're doing is all part of that. And industry doesn't support that type of mentality because industry wants you to apply to all different companies. But there's a form of empowerment of understanding where you want to get to and then seeing it, and then just seeing by getting your first step towards that as a step towards it, as opposed to it being, I didn't get there first time, that's me, I can't do it now.
Absolutely.
And I've spoken to so many engineers that speak to graduates all the time. Like, there's so many people that have sat across from me and I've demonstrated this, not as clearly as you in terms of the almost, how's to phrase it, it's meant to be, it's going to happen, but there's so many evidence of people getting a step that then opens another step, that opens another step, and then they get to where they were going to get to the whole way they were aiming for, but they just didn't see it at the time. And I love that. I love when it happens, because it's you need to, as a student, that's what else can you buy into apart from the evidence that it works.
Yeah, and it's this thing, just like trust, right? And I feel that's one of the things in my Buddhist practice as well. It's like no prayer goes unanswered. And actually I had this thing sort of towards the tail end of, I think, 2024. I was chanting to increase my salary. And then the next thing I know was that my old CEO sends me an email saying, look, we all need to take redundancy. The company is out of money. And like on the surface, like this thing would be like, okay, boom, like clearly like totally 180 degrees to the initial prayer. But then, there was this inner grid of like, man, I'm going to like be fine. And then reaching out to all these other organizations. Then shortly after, I basically had doubled my salary. And so now since then I've probably like, whatever, 4, 5, 6 folded it. And it's this thing, man, it's like whenever we make a decision, immediately there is essentially resistance where whatever the universe, whatever you want to call it, basically tests, do you actually want to do this? The same with like basic job applications, right? The moment one decides of like, okay, cool, I'm going to make myself a contributor in society. Amazing. Really appreciate that there is lots of rejection in the beginning. Because it is this moment of like, oh, wow, you think you want a job? How badly do you want a job? And it's actually like, because if the intention isn't true, then one will run out of steam very, very quickly. But if the intention is true, then it's like, okay, whatever, this is just like one rejection. It doesn't absolutely matter. Or maybe it's like the 10th rejection. Still doesn't matter. Because I know that I will find a path forward.
It's valuable. Thank you very much for that, Tobias. That's awesome. So let's go spin round into the more technical and go wide open to industry. There's a lot spoken around renewables. There's a lot spoken about net zero, and net zero is kind of phraseology now, which probably is a bit dangerous to use, but certainly around sustainability, green technologies, etc. Yeah. What's your vision of the current landscape? And what do you see?
I feel that the biggest thing for me is it's less about net zero, it's more about energy sovereignty. And because I feel when we look at conflict in the world, it's usually about resource, it's usually about energy. And I mean, it starts with the human being though, right? Like if I feel that what I need is outside of me, then of course, I need to ensure access to these resources outside of me. However, on the other hand, if I see, okay, I actually have everything inside of me already to live a successful, thriving life, amazing. And I think that's going for the human being as much as for societies, for nations. And it's energy diversity, I mean, I'm primarily in the hydrogen space now. And so, 2024 definitely felt like a big crash of basically a big hydrogen bubble. And it's I think the whole movement towards all the clean energy technologies is very much also an economic stimulus package. Whereas you have cities introducing low emission zones. Suddenly people who live in the city centers need to buy different types of vehicles, or they need to find different modalities of travel, or they end up going to buy a different home. And so all it does basically, it drives economic transactions, which is the metric that we measure, because we measure GDP at this moment in time in order to determine like how well a country is doing or not.
Which is a lot of nonsense.
It's absolutely nonsense.
Yeah.
And when you look at lots of the renewable energy companies, like how renewable and how sustainable are their business practices? Because you could even go down to business culture. You know, do people... Because even bitching about each other, it's a waste of energy. You know, so if you really want to be very, very sustainable, you will always look to see the highest and best potential in the people you work with and give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if you really want to go like all the way down the sort of like net zero path to not waste energy. But I think the net zero movement is too much focused on just kind of like the outside energies. And then with the whole like hydrogen world, there were all these, it was basically an investment vehicle. It was like all these things of like, oh, cool, yeah, you know, we'll build these like megawatt and gigawatt plants and we need all these different technologies. And I think there's a amazing element to it because it brings people together around a shared cause. And that's fantastic. At the same time, depending on the system boundary, yes, an electric car itself, if you drive this electric vehicle through the city, it appears to be clean. Where did the energy come from that charged the vehicle? What power source has been used to, you know, put the electricity into the car? Has this energy come from potentially fossil fuels? Has it come from a wind turbine? But then even where did the energy come from to make the steel tower for the wind turbine, or to, you know, laminate the blades? What sort of environmental effect does the wind turbine? So basically, I would say there is no energy technology that is having no impact on the planet.
Yeah.
They just have different impacts, right?
Yeah, what do you... It's the interesting debate, and one that I've kind of dabbled in with kind of in private, but why not? We'll go open on the podcast. It's, you know, the debate was all around the EV, and, you know, like the electric car, like you said, the purpose of the electric car is it's clean because it doesn't have emissions, but then, like you said, how is it built? How is the lithium mined? How is the, you know, and then how was the charging? Where was the electricity generated from? The other side of it is which is the kind of innovation side, is you innovate with the product. You innovate, you create the product, and then the supply chains then innovate to become cleaner and greener over time, which then creates a time period where you go from multiple different technologies and multiple different processes from TRL level 1 all the way up, and then you create a greener production system. Is that a way of looking at it as well, or do we not look at it at all and we just think about the end product?
No, I think it does create a cleaner production system, but it also at the same time creates requirements for new things being made all the time, and actually things being made before other stuff is at its end of life.
That's
and so I would say a really important thing is to look at the embodied emissions as well.
Yeah.
And I think with the energy system generally, we're moving just like software, you know, from sort of like on-prem centralized technologies to then, you know, cloud services all distributed. It's the same, I think, with the energy system, where instead of having centralized locations and then from there energy being distributed, we're having distributed energy generation that is then also potentially used in a distributed context. And so looking at, because there's often this sense of there's one energy technology to rule them all, and I don't think that's the case.
No.
We need to be really, really mindful that different arenas on our planet have potential for different sources of green energy. And in some way, you know, with the whole kind of like oil and gas thing, it was like amazing, great, you know, you can basically, it's very versatile, you can just use it anywhere. We need to bring people along, and it all comes in the end back to one-to-one dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And sharing with people, because if you want to put a hydrogen plant somewhere, the public perception is this thing is really dangerous, it could explode. Are we still, you know, like in a like healthy, safe distance from it, blah, blah, blah. So there is this whole element of, actually the technology is almost the simple part, but then to create, you know, public acceptance. At the same time also to educate people, how do you use this technology safely?
Yeah.
So there's like areas that I feel are a bit left to the side, where from an engineering perspective, it's, oh yeah, let's focus on the tech. And it can be really exciting, and it can be a really great way to actually bring people together around the shared cause. But then it's also, okay, let's bring more people into it and see like, how can we actually live, in harmony with nature, in harmony with, what the part of the world gives us where we already live.
Yeah.
And yeah, in a sense, coming back to, okay, we currently are here in Scotland. So what does Scotland offer in terms of energy sources? How could we potentially live in, in a new way where we live actually more in rhythm with nature as well? I mean, the whole thing of, working kind of 9 to 5 for 365 days of the year, it's maybe also not the most energy sustainable way of doing it, because obviously in the summer, the days are longer, we tend to have more energy anyway, and in the winter, it's more like, oh, it's kind of like cool, we just actually want to be inside and snuggle, and maybe there's also kind of a larger part in this sustainable way of working to be considering how does actually the human physiology work in it all as well.
It's really interesting. This has been fascinating. This has been brilliant. I really appreciate your reflections on that. So going back to you personally, then what's the next steps in your career? Where's it going in the next 10 years? Or what's the long-term goal that you may not have shared?
For me, the long-term goal is...
Since money's ticked off.
Yeah, for me, the long-term goal is around this energy sovereignty.
Yeah.
And it's really creating these like multi-dimensional engineering teams. Because I feel there's something in engineering where, we're building structures. And within these structures, certain behaviors are possible and other behaviors are basically impossible or kind of discouraged. And my vision over the next sort of 10 years is to support engineering teams to actually design more in rhythm with nature, and take bio-inspired ideas into their designs, because nature has over billions of years essentially run probably trillions of kind of in parallel experiments of seeing, okay, like how do things work best. And there's also always redundancy in nature systems, right? And nothing is potentially ever fully optimized, but it always has a room to develop and grow. Yeah. And so taking this partly into the design teams, but then also I'm working on a series of retreats where it's this element of, okay, how do we actually allow people to kind of step out of their day-to-day in order to actually, as you were saying, see, okay, why am I doing the thing that I'm doing? Why am I doing it the way that I'm doing it? And then so being able to, really be change agents in their teams.
Yeah.
Because then as they are change agents in their teams, it changes the entirety of the company, it changes the customer relationships, it changes like how they shop with their families, it changes, the communities they're part of. And so in that context as well, one of my, it always feels like the engineering element is sort of it's almost like the kernel of my work. And I feel when I'm working with teams, there's this element of, okay, yes, I bring my technical expertise, but then I'm also bringing a level of just the energy that I bring. And maybe instead of engaging in a sort of like bitchy conversation, reminding, hey, maybe this person had a shitty day and potentially we could see that they are actually aiming to come from a good place, but it didn't really land. And so in that context, it's about setting one's state. And so there is a element of like bioengineering that I find really intriguing. And so my plan actually for later this year is to trial to create basically a state setting co-working space where it's about, okay, if we are in the right life state, we're gonna produce different products, different services, making different contribution to society. And so what I'd love to do is to basically get a space where before anyone does any work, we'll get into mindfulness spaces, maybe do some cold exposure, maybe do some sauna, maybe do some sistema, which is like a Russian martial art, and then just like get into that zone of like, cool, we are dialed, we are now in internal alignment. And yeah, so I could see that this is potentially a thing that can be actually like very scalable. and I could create an environment for lots of other people to actually, kind of like work in a context of aligned energy. And then there's definitely always this boutique consulting element where it's like, I'm able to kind of like come into organizations and kind of dissect and transform. So I'm curious to see how it's all turning out and what are the dots that are sort of coming that I can't fully see yet,
Brilliant. Well, listen, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Tobias. I don't think this will be the last time that you and I talk and certainly work together. There's so many great opportunities going forward, certainly within the space that I'm in as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to end like I always end with, I don't even know what the answer to this is going to be. What keeps you passionate about engineering?
For me, what keeps me passionate is that I feel I can play. I feel I can really make a contribution. And I'm just immensely grateful, for the journey that I've been on and all these like different like weird windy bits to now have come to a place where like, I realize like in a way how I'm wired. And I have the immense privilege to work with other amazing people that are wired in potentially similar ways, or that are, still on their journeys of like figuring out like how am I actually like wired. But it's the sense of like, we're able to, create a world that we want our kids to live in, and we're able to create a world where we can really draw forth the potential that people hold.
I love it. I think, in the current climate, it's good to have people like you to give a sense of awareness and potential. Opportunity is the word that you should always have at the forefront of your mind. And I think you embody that opportunity and positive mindset, engineering mindset. So I love it. But thank you so much for coming to the podcast, Tobias. Cheers.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
No problem.
Or your contribution to being invested into, the development of students. Wouldn't have this platform. So thank you so much.